Welcome back to the PCA Deep Dive. Today, we are looking at a billing issue every modern chiropractic practice should understand. Electrical stimulation is not on trial here. TENS is not the issue. Standard e-stim, ancillary services, cash-based care, and innovation all have an important place in conservative care when they are clinically appropriate, clearly explained, documented, and billed accurately. The issue is more specific. In recent Department of Justice enforcement actions involving P-Stim billing, the concern was not simply that providers used an auricular stimulation device. The concern was that a surface-applied device was allegedly billed using codes intended for surgically implanted neurostimulators. That code should not have been used for that service. And that is the lesson for every practice. The device was not the problem. The billing pathway was. A clinical theory is not a billing code. FDA clearance is not Medicare coverage. Non-covered does not mean inappropriate, and cash-based does not mean non-compliant. This episode is about protecting doctors, patients, and the profession by making sure innovation is adopted with discipline, because good technology still needs accurate coding.
So, picture this. A new medical device enters your clinic.
Okay, always exciting.
And it is this wearable earpiece. It requires literally no surgery whatsoever, and it promises incredible pain relief for your patients.
Sounds like a massive win for conservative care, honestly.
It does. You can apply it in a standard office chair in 5 minutes, but then, on paper, you bill the federal government for a highly complex surgical implant.
Oh yeah, that is a huge problem.
Huge. And today, we are looking at how a seemingly innocent clinical innovation resulted in a $15 million nationwide federal crackdown.
Which is just a staggering number.
It really is. We're going to break down what you, as a practitioner, really need to learn from this incredibly costly mistake. But real quick, before we dive into the mechanics of what actually went wrong, I need to state clearly that this deep dive is strictly for educational purposes. It does not constitute legal, billing, or compliance advice. You should always consult with a qualified healthcare attorney or a certified billing and coding specialist for guidance specific to your practice.
Yeah, that context is absolutely critical here, because the focus today is this major billing issue that came to the forefront in May 2026.
The P-Stim issue.
Exactly, P-Stim, or auricular electrostimulation. We are looking specifically at what Pennsylvania chiropractors and really any integrative practice across the country can learn from this multi-year federal enforcement action.
And I want to establish our core frame right out of the gate, so there's literally zero confusion about what we're actually analyzing here.
Good idea.
Electrical stimulation is not on trial here. 10S is not the issue. This deep dive is absolutely not an attack on P-Stim. It's not an attack on electrical stimulation or ancillary services, vendors, cash-based care, or just innovation as a whole.
No, absolutely not.
This is strictly about coding integrity. It's about payer coverage and ensuring that the claim form perfectly matches the physical reality of what actually happened in the treatment room.
I love that you phrase it that way, because if we want a central thesis to anchor this entire analysis, it is simply this. The device was not the problem. The billing pathway was.
The billing pathway was the problem.
Yes.
So let's look at the sheer scale of that billing pathway failing, because to understand why this blew up, we really have to look at the enforcement activity from May 2026.
And it's important to note, this wasn't just some sudden overnight decision.
No, it stems from a massive multi-year national investigation. This was spearheaded by the DOJ, so the Department of Justice, and the HHS-OIG, which is the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General.
Two very heavy hitters.
Seriously. They were heavily scrutinizing the billing practices surrounding these P-Stim devices. And you might see these devices branded under several different names in the clinical space.
Ancillary or
Yeah.
SCAVAX.
Yeah, Neurostim and the NSS2 bridge, they all fall under this umbrella.
And the scope of this investigation really crystallizes when you look at the actual settlements, because there is a specific Pennsylvania case that serves as a really powerful warning here.
Let's get into that one.
Yeah, so two related integrative chiropractic practices and their owners, they agreed to pay approximately $805,978 to resolve alleged False Claims Act liability.
Over $800,000. Wow.
But that is just a fraction of the broader picture. We are looking at a national effort encompassing over 15 False Claims Act settlements across the entire country.
Which is where that $15 million number comes from.
Exactly, roughly $15 million total. And that includes a $1.72 million settlement in Tennessee, involving 2 chiropractors and a neurologist.
Jeez.
But we do need to use very precise legal language here. These are alleged violations.
Alleged.
Yes, these cases were settled or resolved, meaning the practices agreed to pay the government to basically end the dispute.
So there has been no determination of civil liability.
Precisely. No determination of civil liability.
Okay, I have to push back a little here, though, because when you throw around numbers like $15 million and you mention federal investigations by the DOJ, I immediately picture a coordinated heist.
A lot of people do.
It sounds like practitioners intentionally setting out to just defraud the government on a massive scale. Are you telling me this was basically just a paperwork error?
It's easy to jump to the conclusion of intentional fraud when the numbers get that high. But the reality is much more insidious and, frankly, much more common.
Okay.
It wasn't necessarily some criminal syndicate of doctors. It was what we call a coding reliance risk.
A coding reliance risk.
Yeah. Many of these practitioners simply trusted the wrong playbook. They relied heavily on third-party billing advice, often from the very people selling them the devices, without independently verifying that advice against official payer guidelines.
So they essentially outsourced their critical thinking to a salesperson.
That's one way to put it, yeah.
And that just cascaded into a massive liability. I really want to break down how a smart, highly educated doctor falls into that trap. But first, I think we need to understand the physical reality of the treatments themselves.
Definitely. If we don't understand the physical device, the billing mismatch won't make any sense at all.
Exactly. So let's start with the baseline, right? Standard electrical stimulation.
So standard e-stim and 10-yen-s units, these are foundational tools in conservative care. We're talking about surface electrodes.
Basically sticky pads.
Exactly. Sticky pads applied directly to the skin over a targeted area. And they deliver low-level electrical currents to basically soothe nerve endings, increase localized blood flow, and speed up the healing process for injured tissues.
And they're incredibly common, right? Payers understand them.
Very common, very well understood.
And the clinical evidence totally backs that up. We have a massive scoping review on electrical stimulation in our sources for this deep dive.
Yeah, the scoping review is fascinating.
It highlights varying levels of support depending on the specific modality. For example, neuromuscular electrical stimulation, or NMES, and functional electrical stimulation, FES. Both of those show moderate evidence for rehabilitation. And then you have H-wave device stimulation, which also demonstrates moderate evidence for functional improvement.
So these are very established therapies.
Exactly. But P-Stim, which stands for point stimulation or auricular electrostimulation, that is a completely different physical mechanism, right?
Totally different. These are specialized ear-mounted systems. They combine incredibly small needles and adhesive electrodes to stimulate very specific auricular points.
So essentially acupuncture points located on the ear.
Yes. And the device is attached and then left in place to provide continuous stimulation over a period of several days.
Okay, let's contextualize why a practitioner would even look for a new device like this. Because chiropractors already have an incredibly strong tool set.
They absolutely do.
Just look at the evidence base for standard chiropractic spinal manipulation. There is this fascinating NIH-funded study published in the journal Spine back in 2016.
I know the exact one you're talking about.
It's great. It found that 57% of patients who saw a chiropractor reported at least a 75% reduction in their pain at the 12-week mark.
Which is huge.
It is, especially when you compare that to patients using medications alone. Only 33% saw that level of relief. So we know conservative mechanical care works wonders.
Absolutely.
But the clinical literature does suggest that P-Stim provides potential short-term pain relief for certain patients. So I guess I'm a little hung up on the federal response here.
Okay, where's the disconnect?
If there is a legitimate clinical theory behind P-Stim, why drop the hammer on it? Isn't clinical theory literally the starting point for all medical innovation?
It is the starting point for innovation. But here is the hard truth that every single practice owner must internalize. A clinical theory is not a billing code.
Okay. A clinical theory is not a billing code.
Exactly. The Department of Justice didn't launch a multi-year investigation to debate the scientific literature or dispute whether a patient felt better. The federal concern was entirely about what was printed on the CMS 1500 claim forms. The crackdown was about the categorization of the procedure.
Which brings us right to the core mechanism of the problem. The actual physical reality of the P-Stim device applied to the ear versus the procedural codes submitted to Medicare and TRICARE.
Yes. And the sheer scale of the mismatch here is staggering when you actually break it down.
Walk us through it.
Think about the physical procedure we just described for P-Stim. A provider takes a non-surgical auricular electroacupuncture device. They apply it to a patient's ear. This application happens in a standard office environment. The patient is sitting in a normal chair, fully awake. There is zero anesthesia required, and the entire process takes just a matter of minutes.
Like 5 minutes in a chair.
Yes. Yet, the claims submitted to these federal health programs use codes specifically designated for surgically implanted neurostimulators.
Wait, what?
Yeah. We're talking about CPT code 64555 and HCPCS code L8679.
Hang on. Surgically implanted. You just said this was an earpiece, taped and needled to the ear in an office chair. How on earth does a practitioner justify billing for a surgical implant? Did they just not read the definition of the codes they were submitting?
To understand how severe that leap is, you really have to look at how medical coding actually works. Surgical codes reimburse at a significantly higher rate for very specific reasons.
Okay.
They're calculated based on intense resource utilization. So when a payer sees CPT code 64555, they are paying for operating room time.
Which isn't happening in an office chair.
Exactly. They are paying for the administration and monitoring of anesthesia. They are compensating the surgeon for the inherent risk of cutting into a patient's body, and the immense technical complexity of physically tunneling wires and implanting a pulse generator deep beneath the skin.
Wow. I'm trying to wrap my head around the psychology of this error. Because, okay, let's say I take my car to a mechanic because the check engine light is on.
Sure.
And they plug a diagnostic computer into the dashboard right under the steering wheel, and they find the problem.
Simple enough.
But if they hand me a bill for a complete engine-out transmission rebuild, I'm going to call the police. The diagnostic tool might have worked perfectly, but the mechanic didn't pull the engine out of the car.
No, they didn't.
You can't bill for the labor and risk of a rebuild when you just plugged in a laptop? Is that essentially what happened here?
That analogy captures the mechanical failure of the billing perfectly. You are billing the government for a level of risk, surgical time, and facility intervention that simply did not exist.
Unbelievable.
And the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, they have not been ambiguous about this. If you review their historical guidance, specifically documents like the retired article A55240, CMS explicitly states that acupuncture for the stimulation of auricular points is not a covered Medicare benefit.
They explicitly said it.
Yes. And beyond that, they explicitly stated that P-Stim devices cannot be coded using those surgical implant codes.
This brings me back to my earlier question, though. Because if the rules are that explicit, how does a highly educated doctor fall into this coverage verification gap? Why would they risk their entire livelihood on a code that clearly says surgical implant?
Because they had a very persuasive voice in their ear telling them it was perfectly fine. This is the danger of confusing marketing materials with legal payer guidelines. In the DOJ filings, they heavily detail the role of promoters, marketers, and third-party billing consultants. These individuals were allegedly charging monthly fees to provide this exact incorrect coding recommendation to their customers.
Yeah, our sources actually highlight a specific example of a chiropractor who promoted himself as a medical reimbursement consultant. He was charging a monthly fee to provide these exact coding recommendations, allegedly knowing full well that P-Stim was not reimbursable as a surgically implanted device.
It's terrible.
That is just a massive betrayal of trust within the profession.
It is a betrayal.
Yeah.
And it created a widespread reimbursement due diligence issue.
Yeah.
But it also highlights a non-negotiable rule for running a compliant practice.
What's that?
Marketing materials are not payer guidance.
Marketing materials are not payer guidance.
Exactly. You cannot rely on a salesperson, a vendor, or some third-party consultant to tell you how to legally bill the federal government, especially when their financial success depends on you buying their product.
But I want to play devil's advocate here for a second regarding the devices themselves, because marketers love to throw around the term FDA cleared.
Oh, they do.
And a lot of these auricular devices, like the NSS2 bridge, they do have FDA clearance. So if I'm a practitioner and I see the FDA stamp of approval, doesn't that legitimize the billing?
It legitimizes the safety of the device, but FDA clearance is not Medicare coverage.
That is a vital distinction.
It catches a lot of practitioners off guard. The FDA clears a device to ensure it is safe for the public to use for its specific intended purpose. They're evaluating safety and clinical efficacy. Medicare, on the other hand, evaluates whether a treatment is reasonable and necessary for reimbursement under their specific statutory guidelines for the Medicare population.
So clinical value is not the same as payer coverage.
Exactly.
Just because an innovative device helps your patient, even if it provides miraculous, documented pain relief, that does not automatically unlock federal funds to pay for it.
Exactly the opposite, in fact. The government is entirely agnostic to your patient's anecdotal relief if the procedure doesn't fit a covered benefit category.
Okay, let's explore the reality of a modern practice then, because I'm putting myself in the shoes of a practitioner right now.
Okay, let's do it.
I find an innovative device, I read the clinical literature, I try it out, and I truly believe it helps my patients manage their pain without opioids.
Which is a great goal.
But I do my due diligence, I check the CMS guidelines, and Medicare absolutely refuses to cover it. Are my hands just tied? Do I have to abandon the innovation entirely and tell my patients I have a tool that could help them, but I'm not legally allowed to use it?
Absolutely not. And this is perhaps the most important clinical takeaway from this entire deep dive. Non-covered does not mean inappropriate.
Non-covered does not mean inappropriate.
Exactly. The fact that Medicare won't reimburse you for a service has absolutely no bearing on whether it is a clinically appropriate, ethical, or legal treatment to offer your patients.
Which perfectly opens the door to ancillary and cash-based services. If you operate a conservative care model, you can still offer cutting-edge care outside the bounds of federal reimbursement.
You can, and you should, if it truly benefits the patient. But we need to establish the compliance framework for that. Cash-based does not mean non-compliant. You cannot just operate like the Wild West simply because you aren't billing insurance. There are strict requirements to offer cash-based services ethically and legally.
Let's define those requirements based on the sources we have. First, the service has to be legally permitted within your specific state scope of practice.
Check.
Second, it has to be clinically justified. You can't just throw every new gadget at a patient without a clinical rationale.
You need a clinical reason.
The pricing has to be completely transparent. The care must be fully documented in the patient's chart, just as if you were billing insurance. And critically, all of this has to be explained to the patient before any care is actually provided.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this aligns perfectly with the stance of professional associations, like the Pennsylvania Chiropractic Association, or PCA. The PCA and the profession at large, they fully support innovation, they support business partners, expanding conservative care options, and they support cash-based services.
But there are strings attached.
Absolutely. They insist on accurate coding, flawless clinical documentation, total financial transparency with the patient, and independent verification of all billing advice.
It's essentially like offering a premium upgrade on a commercial flight. You can absolutely sell a passenger a first-class seat,
Sure.
but you have to tell the passenger up front exactly what that upgrade costs out of pocket before they board the plane. You cannot put them in first class, secretly bill the airline's corporate office for the seat later, and pretend it was a standard operating expense. It requires total transparency.
That transparency extends directly to accountability, too. Ultimately, the provider whose National Provider Identifier, your NPI number, is on that claim form is the one holding the bag. You are legally responsible for the accuracy of that claim. You cannot outsource your compliance liability to a device vendor or a marketer. If they give you bad advice and your NPI is on the form, you are the one signing the settlement check with the Department of Justice.
I think that is the most sobering lesson here. So let's synthesize everything we've covered today.
Let's do it.
Standard e-stim remains a highly effective, incredibly important conservative care tool when it is clinically appropriate, clearly documented, and accurately billed using the correct surface application codes.
Absolutely.
The multi-year DOJ investigations, the $15 million in national settlements, the $800,000 settlement in Pennsylvania, these are not indictments of conservative care. They aren't meant to scare you away from trying to help your patients with new modalities. They just serve as a protective warning for the profession to maintain absolute coding integrity.
I really couldn't summarize it better. Responsible innovation protects the patient and the profession. Chiropractic should never fear innovation. Rather, it should adopt innovation with absolute, unyielding discipline.
So what does this all mean for you as you walk into your clinic tomorrow?
I want to leave you with a final thought to just mull over. We are living in a fascinating era where medical technology is shrinking at an unprecedented rate.
It really is.
We're moving incredibly fast from the era of large, complex surgical implants to wearable, stick-on devices that just connect via Bluetooth to our smartphones. And as that miniaturization continues, the line between a highly regulated medical procedure and consumer-level wellness tech is going to blur even further.
Without a doubt.
How will you ensure your practice's billing adapts to this future of miniaturized tech without falling into the exact same coverage verification gap that cost these practices $15 million? It's something to think carefully about the next time a vendor promises you a breakthrough. Keep learning, keep questioning, and above all, independently verify.
The lesson is clear. Electrical stimulation is not on trial. TENS is not the issue. Ancillary services, cash-based care, and innovation all have a place in modern chiropractic practice when they are clinically appropriate, clearly explained, documented, and billed accurately. The P-Stim cases teach a narrower point. The billing code must match the service. A surface-applied auricular device should not be billed as a surgically implanted neurostimulator. That is not a rejection of conservative technology. It is a reminder that the claim form tells a story, and that story has to be true. Non-covered does not mean inappropriate. Cash-based does not mean non-compliant. FDA clearance is not Medicare coverage, and a clinical theory is not a billing code. The path forward is not fear, it is discipline. Verify coverage, document clearly, be transparent with patients, and never let a reimbursement promise replace professional judgment. Responsible innovation protects the patient, the practice, and the profession. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.